Hello and welcome to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. Today's guest is someone who's had a huge influence on me and the way I think about coaching, the fabulous Richard Cheetham MBE. Richard is a senior fellow in sports coaching at the University of Winchester and an award-winning coach educator who's worked across sports from rugby to cycling, fencing to canoeing, and everything in between. He supported coaches all over the world, including with the UCI's International Coaching Diploma and at the very top level of professional cycling. But what stands out most about Richard is the person behind all that experience, his empathy, curiosity, and his belief that play, joy, and connection sit right at the heart of great coaching. In this episode, we talk about creating environments where people want to stay, why play is a serious business, and why the best coaches think about who they coach before what they coach. Here's my conversation with Richard Cheetham. So Richard, we've met each other on lots of different occasions in lots of different environments at the university where you work. And I remember at Reading Football Club, we did some stuff with UK coaching. So it's lovely to be able to have you on the podcast. I don't suppose you'd kick us off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
It's my 20th year at the University of Winchester. I started 20 years ago this month. And it had been, after coming back from New Zealand, where I'd taught and coached for 3 years, my sort of education, if you like, was A-levels, then an HND. And I ended up working at a technical college for a few years on their BTEC sports program, which I really enjoyed, A-level PE as well. Part of maybe the conversation today is about significant others. Met a lady called Fran Noon, who was my boss, and said, you need to go and sort of take the next step. So I did my master's in sports science, which was a game changer, really, in terms of open up opportunities. But it wasn't till I really went to New Zealand and found that when I was coaching that I actually wanted to be more involved in coaching. So that's that people skills, the non-measurables, the relationships, the practical hands-on drew me, really. So that's what I came back. And then when I started here, it was about changing from a sport development course. And then since then, I've been teaching a coaching degree and working as a coach educator developer in lots of different organisations, from World Cycling to England Rugby, probably my two prime ones. And then UK coaching has been a significant influence as well.
Whenever I've spent time with you, Richard, the way that you work with people, your interpersonal skills that has just come to the fore. I've not met many people who are as kind or compassionate or thoughtful as you when you're engaging. Is that something that's like evolved over time?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of you to say that. And I generally want to project myself as somebody who obviously wants the best out of people who I work with. I want to understand the kind of anxieties that they may have. I work with coaches who are nervous about starting that journey, ones who are halfway through it, and ones who are working in different settings. If I can share my experience with them and help them, then that enriches me, and it's what I want to be able to offer them. But I think it's maybe seeing myself in them. I remember the phrase, I was you once. And that rings very true to me. I understand what it's like. And when I can empathize from a position of understanding what it's like, being on that coaching journey, standing in front of people, thinking you to validate yourself in ways that you don't actually, I've got to be so technically proficient. Well, the priority is not always that. Your priority is a connection, understanding who is the audience, and also that awareness of you. How do I project myself? I mean, it's really nice that you say that, because we don't get that zoom out of ourselves to see how we come across. We don't listen to ourselves, watch ourselves. So it's the reflection of others that we have to use and think, that's great that people think that. It's great that you experience that. I want those I work with to experience the joy of learning, the reflection, say, I'm glad I went. That's been really useful for me. And I've met some good people and think I've had to learn to get better and to take on board feedback and then understand really that critical friend, and also your own ability to go, you know what, that could have been better, or that was really good.
Your approach completely resonates with me. And I'm thinking about there might be other practitioners out there who might take more of a technical, tactical perspective when they're working with a coach. So why is it so important to you that you put the person first and you bring all those skills, like connection before correction, if you like, the empathy, the things you've just spoken about? Why do you prioritize those?
Because they are the uniqueness of that individual, the uniqueness of where they're at, their journey, their anxieties, everything they bring to that day when they turn up will be uniquely them. I'm nervous, I'm experienced, I want to learn. My aspirations, my goals are very different. And if you take time to realize that the 10, 15, 20, 30 people in front of you, as much as you can with a group, is your connection with them, your relatedness to them is how you present the information. You know, you got the why, and the why is making it meaningful. Why am I here? Why do we do that? And being able to answer the whys. And I want to know why they're there. And I want them to be able to say, well, not actually so much why is it important, to realize why it's important. You know, a lot of the work around play and relationship building, I never lead with what we're doing. We just do it. And then the understanding comes. I say, what did you notice? It's great fun. It's really, I didn't realize. And so by experiencing something, they become advocates of it. They become advocates of play. They become advocates of the joy of learning. They become advocates of relationship building connection because they've experienced it firsthand. So I always want people to remember things. You know, we can all remember a really joyful moment, something that we hold and think, you know what, I remember that day when we went go-karting, Tom, you know, all my students couldn't drive and the smoke came out of his engine because he had the accelerator and the brake on at the same time. I can't remember what we learned on the day, but I do remember that bit. So the environment in which people learn, the time you have with people is precious. Sometimes they're taking time out of their day to come to your session. They've joined a course, they've gone back to education. So you have to be very mindful of, as I always phrase, be the audience, sit in front of yourself, imagine you experiencing what you're presenting.
There's a wonderful phrase that I heard relatively recently where somebody said that most people aren't learning what you're teaching them. And your question there about what did you notice, right, just brings that to life for me. That, and I could think about this in my experiences, that regardless of what we're trying to deliver or lead with, will land differently with everybody in the room. And so much of this comes back to the environment you create for people to enter into and bring themselves.
Absolutely. There's plenty of research, and there's plenty of coaches who will talk about environment, culture. And those are the things that retain people. They don't want to leave because it's a wonderful place to stay or are drawn towards it. What is it about that sport, that team, that coach? Well, it's such a great environment. And then what do you mean by that environment? And then you say the noticing is interesting because they might notice something you didn't think was it. Oh, I didn't notice that. I remember an experience last year when I pointed out something, and it was a year later I met the same coach and they said, last year when you met us, you were the only person who I recognized that this might have been a problem for me. And whereas everybody was blind to it, and they appreciated it. And I was glad to get that feedback. I hadn't realized it had resonated with them. And that's part of the reason about teaching coaching, that you don't always know what resonates with people, maybe ever, but sometimes they come back to you and they remind you.
In another episode, Martin Dighton shared some advice for coaches. His advice was stop coaching, which sounds a bit controversial, but he pointed out that so many coaches are doing so often. Everything's fast and furious. So take the opportunity to step back and out and look around and listen to what's going on. And I've always experienced that when I'm with you, and from the stories that you're saying, that changing the tempo and creating the space to pay attention to what's going on around you is so important. Otherwise you'll just miss so many things.
Yeah, I think there is a feeling from my experience is that as coaches, we have to be doing. We have to be constantly feeding, managing, orchestrating. And in fact, it's not like that. It's about a presence that is more than a hands-on. Sometimes a hands-off is exactly what's needed. Yesterday we did an an activity with some students who just joined the university. And I said to my colleague who invited me in to them, said, this is the activity, but they must lead it. We are the catalyst. We give the catalyst for them to go and do. And it was just brilliant watching them for 40 minutes. As you know, my daughter's involved in downhill, in mountain bike racing, and it's not when you go to a race and there's just the kids create that environment. It's an environment where the coaches aren't there, if you like. It's a very interesting environment where the kids learn from each other. And I've often said, BMX track, downhill mountain bike, skateboard park are the places where learning's taking place without a coach. What does that tell us? What can we learn from that? And I think one of the things you take from it is provide an environment that is challenging, meaningful, really learner-centered.
I remember you speaking on a UK coaching event about that skate park environment, and appreciate that there's not necessarily a copy and paste into every sport. But if coaches from different sports are able to think, well, what are the characteristics of a skate park and what's the right dosage of that within the environment I'm working in, and from a football perspective, I try where I can to create as many opportunities for the children to learn from each other. It might be slightly structured, teach you to beat me, through to just explore and play. And what do you notice about the opposition? And then how can we use that to create our own plan? I don't need to feed them all this stuff. I just need to create the conditions for them to do it for themselves.
I mean, I love that word dosage. How much of a dosage of us do we need? It's a nice way of framing it, like it's almost like a drip feed rather than a constant injection. And I think what our role as a coach is to go back to the environment, is to make it something that we are inspired by. It's joyful. We want to come back each week. We don't miss it. And the gaps in between one session and the other, where you go and do your own thing to get better. Since, might have a session on Tuesday, Thursday, and that's it. But you might be, what are they doing Wednesday night? Doing their extra little bit. They're going with their friends down the park, because it's so important when you see that. And to go to a place and watch something where children are so driven to explore and stay with it and face challenges, to be with each other, particularly when it's your child, it's just, I don't think it's any better.
Really buy into the mindset. I wonder if as coaches listening to this, who might think, oh, I'm tied to the narrative of what my club or environment expects of me as a coach. So how do coaches create, I know there's not a silver bullet answer for this, but how do coaches create the wiggle room that they can provide something different within their environment than what perhaps is the status quo?
Well, I think it comes from we'll talk about coaching agility. Just, you have a very dynamic environment in front of you. Things won't go to plan. Things may move to an area that they really like that, or they didn't like that, or how can I respond to what's happening, rather than this is what we're going to do, and then not be able to be agile enough or intuitive enough to go, okay, well, let's just take it this way. Let's just take it this way. And I remember, I can't remember what it was. It's been there such a long time. Maybe it was 2 years into being here. I don't know. Did an open day with some college students around research. I started off with this one question, and the answer didn't come back as I'd expected it to. In an instant, I changed the whole session around what I was going to do. I ditched all the slides, to put a photograph on the screen, changed the whole thing, because I knew that wasn't going to win. There was no point in me going down that pathway. And I don't even think they knew that I changed it. But that comes from experience. That comes from intuition. We talk about deep listening, when you really are listening to what somebody's saying. So when someone's nervous about something, they are really nervous about it. It's important that you listen to that. But also it's observation. Are we really seeing what's happening in front of us? What does engagement look like? What does engagement sound like? What does it feel like? And over time, you'll just see those signals, those cues that come back to you, say, I can stand back here. It's all happening.
So this will sound really provocational, and it's kind of meant to be. But what would you say to the coach who has limited time, they're learning and developing maybe earlier in their journey, and they survive by structure? Having the plan and knowing what we're doing next just helps the coach get through that part of the session, because I haven't got time to think about all these different things that could happen. So what would you say to them in the hope that they might be able to develop some coaching agility within their toolbox of skills?
Well, first of all, I'd throw away any timings. There you go. I'm in a coaching course where you have to do warm-up's 8 minutes and the main body 10 minutes. What do you do next 2 minutes? I'd throw away that completely. And I will always say that, because if you're tied to time, yes, the session's an hour. And I know we need to warm up and engage and so on. But, learning isn't linear. Learning doesn't take 5 minutes to do this and 10 minutes to do that. So I'd take away the word structure on timings, and I'd say intentions. An hour from now, what do you want them to have learned about and be better at? And then let that flow. I've heard this phrase, as I'm sure you have in your football, you want players to express themselves. Well, I don't know how often people say it and allow it. Because for people to really express themselves is to literally allow them to go on stage and be who they are. Just express yourself. Who are you? But don't say express yourself providing you don't do this and don't do that, because that's not really expressing yourselves. One of the joys of working here is that over time, I've been given that autonomy and trust to know that if I'm doing a session around go-karting like we did, or the indoor play centre or down the park, that people know there's a rationale behind it, and they just let me go and do it because they know that there's value in it and there's reason behind it. So I'd say, have faith, co-create something, offer it to those you coach, but don't put timings on your session design. Just put intentions. So you look back and go, you know what, I wanted them to have a really good warm-up. I wanted to have plenty of opportunities to do this skill. And then I wanted this skill to be really showcased in a game at the end.
Simple.
It's not a shopping list of things to do. It's an intention.
Yeah, love that. And our mutual friend Craig Morris would often talk about being prepared rather than planned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it in a nutshell. It's the ifs, the what ifs, rather than the what nows.
And some of that comes with experience and time.
Yeah, and I would say to the coach on their journey, they are the heartbeat of sport in this country. The volunteer coach who's just so keen and enthusiastic to develop and so on. I've mentored coaches and informally and formally. Reach out to someone. People are only too keen to stand at the sidelines and watch and give you feedback or support. You've got questions. Most coaches will support other coaches who've got the experience. They'll have probably seen what you've experienced. They've done it before.
Brilliant advice, Richard. We're going to move into the second part of our conversation. So in every episode of the podcast, we're building something that we're calling the game plan. So a shared playbook of ideas and stories and lessons that any coach could really draw from. So I'm asking every guest to add something unique into the game plan. And I wonder what story or idea or lesson you might be bringing with you.
Okay, well, it's probably one of the things which I really like is just a concept. When I was playing basketball and did my coaching course in basketball, was the idea of free play. And free play, not in a basketball setting purely, but free play literally in that moment of free play, is allowing time to step back, even if it starts a session, that free play. Allowing those who are in your session to literally, okay, well, just have some time, 30 seconds, 4 or 5 minutes. I mentioned about timing is a bit of contradiction, but don't tell them the time. Allow yourself some time to just watch, stand back and let them play. Let the energy release. Just stand and watch. And what is it they're doing? What skills are they learning? How are they using the space? And then, I think that free play is a really critical part of all sports. That ability just to go and stand back, off you go, and then bring them back in. Sometimes it's a great way to engage. It's a starter. You don't need to provide an activity, just provide them and the equipment and the space. And then that first activity is a way of capturing what the environment you're creating is like. It really is shaped by them, influenced by you. Now, I went to Birmingham City a long time ago and watched a session in the evening, and that free play with the young kids was literally where they tried all the trick shots. They tried all the overhead kicks, and they tried the Cruyff turns and all, and not very experienced about football, but they tried all the cool things. And then it was about that chance when it comes to the game, it's no coincidence that super skill, that amazing overhead kick, whatever they've done, suddenly comes into the game because they've been allowed that freedom to practice it, to try and error it. So that's a skateboard park brought into football, brought into basketball, where you can try and learn from that effort, make a mistake, but the consequence of making that mistake means that you learn and try it again. And I think that freedom is really important. There's no structure.
Love the soundbite that you shared a second ago. The environment shaped by the team, influenced by you. That's really going to stick with me. And I know a lot of your work has been centered around play. For those who haven't thought about it, or maybe are looking at their own environment thinking, oh, it's far too serious for play. Like, what are the benefits and why is play so important?
Because we all need it. We all have had it in our lives as children. It's been a nourishing, energizing, connecting activity that actually is restorative. We've had a bad day at work, and then we come to your session and we start with play, and it's uplifting. Play isn't miserable. Play is joyful, and it is that activity medicine, if you like. It's something that we know that in terms of child development, it's critical to have that. Become an advocate of it. Don't think you have to link it to learning, because learning will be happening. Just maybe, as we mentioned before we started, not in the way you expected it. Oh, we learned that. I hadn't expected to learn this. And it's interesting because we all have the contention about how we design sessions, and we do this or do that, and so on and so forth. But I've never met anybody who's not an advocate of play. Not like an area of contention. I mean, it's like one of these dietary things where people say, oh, no carbs after 3. Well, I don't agree with that. Okay, I don't know whether you should or not. But, no one has come to me and said, oh, we're not allowed to play. I've seen signs, don't play in the grass. But no one said to me, we don't play, because it's such an integral part of human development.
It's just relevant in every context and every setting a coach could possibly work. From my own experiences, as you know, Richard, I spent some time a few years ago working in prisons and probably visited a women's prison in South London about 60 times. And we tried to thread through play into the way that we created an environment and designed a session. And I remember in the classroom, we used story cubes as a brilliant way of creating a bit of structure for the women to think imaginatively and creatively around telling a story. And then what that led to was, we had better connections in the group. People felt energized and came with a real appetite to be involved. And I remember when we went outside, we started some sessions with some rough and tumble. When we did some wrestling with the women, and one had to pin the other to the floor, and the other had to try and get up. And the laughter, it was a real hoot. You could have turned around, shut your eyes, and you could have been anywhere, not in a prison. The serious bit behind it, brilliant for emotional self-regulation. There's some physical benefits to it too. But actually, it was creating an environment and a space which was just like so needed for that.
I mean, you mentioned the last thing you mentioned about needed. We do need it. It's essential, but it's also a need as well. And sometimes you don't know how much people are crying out for that need until they do it, and they think, oh, this is great. And if you can take in that environment and other settings, you say it's amazing how much of a catalyst you become to something that you didn't expect would be so impactful. I was with a training camp over Christmas. I took a game with me called Slapsy. I will say it now because I'm not selling it. It's just a great game of kind of like a snap game. And I just gave it to one coach. So look, I brought this with me. It's brand new. I don't know. Take it. He said, I've got to take some back to my kids when I go back home. I said, look, just take this game with you. And he said, oh, thanks very much. Anyway, I went down to the bar at 7:00 and they're playing this game, and they finished it at 1 a.m. It became infectious. It became spontaneous. It became something that drew people in. It became a distraction, a way of all of those wonderful things wrapped up in it. And, I will always use that. I mean, already I've got the playfulness of the pop-up tents ready for week 1, lecture 1. which I've mentioned before, that's going to come to the students expecting something very formal and then realizing they've got to pack away a tent. It's because I want them to connect to the joy of learning. I did one session which was quite interesting actually, when I talked about philosophy on an England rugby course. And so we must have done, I don't know, I think I got 15 minutes of activity. So I didn't do anything about philosophy. I just played this game for 15 minutes. And I said, right, tell me what my philosophy is. Because I wanted not to tell them. I wanted them to experience it and say, well, now what do you think? And they said, oh, well, we think this is important to you. We think you stand by this. We think these are some of your values and beliefs. And it resonated more than a slide about philosophy, because I want to make sure that what's important to me is what those I coach experience. So when you said those kind words at the beginning, that is brilliant, because it means a lot to me, because you're experiencing what I think is important, what I stand for.
Super. Richard, thank you. We're going to add free play into our game plan. And I would just encourage anybody listening to this to consider how they can build more opportunities for play into the work that they do. And another story that comes to mind actually while we're thinking about this is a brilliant game you introduced to me called Happy Salmon, which I took Happy Salmon. If you haven't seen it, Google it. I mean, there's plenty of videos of people playing it out there. I took Happy Salmon over on a coaching trip to Canada and used it as a kind of connection activity with a new group of players. And I didn't explain the rules. I just gave them the pack and I said, over to you. So I was able to step back and just see this like joy of chaos just unfurl. And I've seen it used where new players are joining a group. And it's a brilliant way to help somebody feel part of the wider team, to come and play a game that's completely disarming in many respects, because it's just crazy and fun and easy to pick up and play, and how people can just get involved quickly. You're in and you're playing. And the sheer transferability of it, again, I took it on a coaching trip to Zambia. And we played it with 50 emerging coaches in a local town. And we played it in a different way. I thought there's just something really special about the simplicity of this, but how it just helps people to connect and smile and be themselves.
I mean, it's interesting you say it, because I use this phrase, it's called diminished consciousness of self. So it back means I suddenly take my armor off. I use that a lot. Take my armor off and immerse myself, blind to kind of what I'm worried about people think of me, and I just get involved. That is that game. It's interesting because you play it and then you don't say, we're going to play it, I want you to be more playful. I say to them, do you want to play a game? So yeah, because no one ever says, I don't want to play a game. I don't think I've ever had anybody yet say, I don't want to play a game. Okay. Or if they did, they then played the next game because they realized how much fun the game they missed out on was. And Happy Salmon is one of those examples where it grabs you, it releases you, and from that self-consciousness, because you just become, I don't know, able to go back to what that kind of childhood experience of playfulness is like.
And I think for me, you've just hit the nail on the head. Diminished consciousness of self, or taking your armor off. Coaches wear a significant amount of armor, I find sometimes. And so do some of the players that we coach. They're trying to project or present something that they feel like is the right thing in this environment. If we can help them with that, then surely we're going to help that person just thrive in the environment we create.
Yeah, just show, we're all humans. Show your human side. You don't need to reinforce your authority. We know that coaching and athlete relationship, we know that you are the coach, but we all have a human side. And what I often think is, if I'm doing a session on play, I've got to be the best player, not the best player in terms of winning. I've got to be absolutely armor off, run around. Because if I'm not projecting it, how can I expect those others to project it? So I've got to really benchmark what it is.
Lots to think about in there. And I'd be curious to what coaches are considering to take back into their own environment. Richard, we're going to move on to the final part of our conversation, which is our game changer. And I like to end every one of our episodes with something practical, maybe powerful, that coaches might take away and either apply in their own environment or tweak it or maybe just reflect on to pick up and use it another time. So from your experiences and what you're bringing with you, what's your game-changing piece of advice that you'd like to share?
Well, game-changing piece of advice not probably for me is think about those you coach primarily before what you coach. These are people in front of me who come with just a whole variety of experiences, anxieties, abilities, backgrounds, journeys, and just think about those people before you think about what you're coaching. I spend a lot of time in the first few weeks of term with a new group, in times with those I coach and those coaches I work with, just wanting to know who is my audience. Because that is the most important thing. That gives rise to your ability to be intuitive about what they need as a group, as an individual, as what's appropriate. Because if I'm working with coaches, what's important is I understand their context, where they're going back to. So they won't be going back to a beautiful AstroTurf that's 10 by 10 on a beautiful sunny day with all the equipment, with 24 people who can, they'll have a whole variety. So for me, that is the most important thing. Understand who you coach before what you coach.
Fantastic advice. Just a thought. I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of grassroots coach. I've got 20 young people in front of me who I want to make sure I have the best possible experience. They're all different. When you're working with bigger numbers over a period of time, have you got any practical strategies that a coach might play with that means that even though they have a lot of children they're trying to support in their group, they're still able to individualize the work they do and connect on that one-to-one basis?
You're talking probably about, I would say, a significant number of coaches at grassroots level who will experience this all year with all groups. The one who's just joined, the one who's ready to move on to the next step, and they'll be right in front of you. I would say this: high activity levels engages people. Integrate people as much as you can, because the more you separate, the more they will be separated. So when it comes to games, the less they're likely to interact with somebody who is in a different level. Have that, we talk about gamification, which is a really lovely model of thinking that you can, within that group, have somebody on level 5 while someone is working on level 1 in the same room, in the same session. It's not easy. I'm not naive. I have been there. It's part of kind of my apprenticeship, and part of what I still do is to recognize that when you work with these individuals, the way that to encourage them is to give them their individual stretch. And I've mentioned this before when I taught juggling to some physiotherapists, which they weren't expecting. When I had 70 in the room, there's your mixed ability group straight away. I've got those who could juggle, help teach those who couldn't. That is still a possibility. Peer-to-peer feedback in a group gives them that responsibility. And then I just remember saying to them, the student I taught, I said, how are you out of 10? She said, I'm about a 2 out of 10. I said, well, let's get you to 3. And you can take that concept into an environment where there are multiple levels of experience and competencies, and just say, right, how can I get you to 3 out of 10? I'm not taking you to 10 right now. You're looking at somebody who's 10, like, well, is there a 10 out of 10? You're looking at somebody who's an 8 out of 10. Don't measure yourself by them. Let me give you something that's going to get you to 3. And that ability to go in, and we spoke about noticing, that's critical, that everybody in your group has got to feel that they are being noticed and they're getting feedback that is appropriate to their success. It is extremely rewarding. It's extremely uplifting to be told by somebody that you've done something that you didn't think they noticed, but was a success for you, even if it is now being able to do this.
Thank you. Some absolute gold in there, I think, for coaches to think about. There's some headlines actually that I've written down in front of me that have kind of resonated for me. helping those you coach connect with the joy of learning through play and the environment that you create, having some coaching agility, so being able to let go, put intentions ahead of structure. And then the final point there that you were just talking about, the superpower of being able to notice stuff, but also not just notice it, but tell people and acknowledge it and link that into the connections that you create with the people that you're coaching. So it's person first, activity second.
It is absolutely, who's in front of me is the most important thing. If you disregard that, then you're disregarding what the needs of those in front of you are. Okay, and that's where that agility comes in. I thought they needed this. Actually, you know what? Right now, I think this is the most appropriate for them. We'll give you an example. I'm fortunate enough to work with coaches from many different countries in the same room. And the first thing that I notice about them is that they will have traveled a long way and have different experiences. And the most important thing is they want to feel safe in that room. They want to feel reassured that they're going to be supported. They're not going to struggle without support. And that reassurance is that morning. I spend that morning working on connection, reassurance. The pace of learning is going to be led by you.
Lovely to spend the last half an hour or so with you. Thank you for being superb as ever.
Thanks very much, Tom. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Game Plan Coaching Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please follow the show and share it with a coach who might find it useful. I'd love to hear your feedback and any ideas for future guests. You can get in touch through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and go well in your next coaching session.